Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, we have been witnessing presentations submitted by the 4 study groups on given topics. I thank all those 4 groups for their remarkable contribution. And with that, I cordially invite the chair and the panelists to commence their expertise comments on the group presentations and to mark the formal closure of the session. So over to you.
Thank you, Major General Ravi Priya. So I'll just assume the role of the chair. I was the timekeeper earlier, so I just kept to that task. Let me formally thank the Sri Lanka Army for inviting myself and all of us. But let's start the proceedings. Mr. Prasad Karyavasam, Secretary, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Lieutenant General Mahesh Senanayake, Commander of the Sri Lanka Army, all senior military leaders from all international participants, senior officers, researchers, academics. It's a great privilege to, I think, chair this session because you can see from the right and the left. If you are a movie fan, this is the ultimate Avengers assemblage of people, of minds and of skill. So what I'm going to do is I'll quickly do an overview in a couple of minutes. I think it's very timely for the Sri Lankan Army to look at the concept of countering violent extremism in a global perspective. Because what we are seeing currently in the world is a significant global divide. A divide of opinion, divide of action, and a void of political leadership. So in that context, what we are seeing is more marginalization, more extremism, and the idea of extremism basically is that the belief that the current existing status quo is not working, it's not delivering. In that way, every extremist, irrespective of whether the extremist is religious, secular, it's an ideological driver. So extremists want to shape, structure, and sustain a new system through the means of using violence, because they do not believe of the existing system. So when a military has to face such an adversary, because this adversary was not the adversary any military faced for a long time. I mean, militaries have been facing this adversary for a while, so which basically means the adversary that existed in the transformation of global politics and military sciences has, evolved or transformed significantly. You are now facing with an ideological challenge. How do you challenge ideology? Because this idea of extremism is grown in the mind. It's psychological, then it's kind of manifested ideologically. How do you then encounter that? This is not your average enemy, right? And it does not exist in a certain space. Extremism is borderless. Extremism is not, you can find it in any part of the world. No part of the world is immune to that, right? Irrespective of whether which spectrum you belong to, the most developed or to the least developed. So the spatial configuration of understanding the enemy itself has changed. So I think that is why, and it's pertinent that the Sri Lankan Army has taken the leadership of organizing a conference which is looking not just at the current context, but it's looking at a future, great and a grave future challenge for the whole structure of the nation state. So in that context, I think we had a very interesting dialogue, especially this session, where the participants are kind of driven to engage. Because at the end, the speeches are very important. The academic kind of contribution that was made from yesterday is very important. But the best takeaway is the sharing of experiences that when many military officials meet and then kind of, brainstorm and then are guided by experts. That kind of knowledge and also the kind of questions, as the last presenter said, we are leaving with a set of questions, right? Because the violent extremism itself is kind of creating so many new questions that we had not addressed, the world had not seen in a while, and seems to be a little bit challenged. So in that context, we had 4 major group discussions, we had 4 major themes. So what I would ask is for each expert, they all had 4 groups, so you can kind of use 10 minutes between the 2 experts to quickly give your feedback about the presentations, and then we'll wrap it up in totality. So I'll ask the 2 experts from Group A to make their contributions.
Thank you very much. May I first thank Lieutenant General Mahesh Senanayake for the invitation that was extended to me to participate. May I also acknowledge the presence of Foreign Secretary Prasad Karyavasam at the forum, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. The task that was given to our group was to talk about balancing hard power and soft power. And we thought about looking at it from the broader theme of countering violent extremism and how do we balance hard power and soft power in that context. Theoretically, we were looking at the 2 concepts of power transition and power diffusion that was spoken about by Professor Joseph Nye. The concept that power is transitioning from the west to the east, and the concept that power is also diffusing. The fact that the individual is gaining much more power, and information and communication technology has also empowered people. So you see a power transition and a power diffusion. So no longer is this idea or the concept of nation states being the only actors involved. You have transnational actors, you have groups, you have individuals who we all have to contend with in countering violent extremism and also in balancing hard power and soft power. So the discussions that took place was very vibrant. As with other groups, I think the complexity of the question itself leads on to the other 4 presentations about the role of the military in governance and also 4th generation warfare. All these things have to be taken into account when we are balancing hard power and soft power. We can't say we came up with a final conclusion, but we did come up with the idea that the international order that has come about following the end of the 2 world wars and the end of the Cold War, the rules-based system of governance that is being challenged in a very significant manner means that we really need to look for solutions and to understand exactly why these issues are arising. So that was some of the discussions that we had, and I'll hand over to my colleague to talk about the specific situations that we discussed.
Thank you, Sashi. Secretary of Foreign Affairs and the Commander of the Army, thank you very much. As Sashi said, we deliberated much on the topic of hard power and soft power, and certainly we could not come to a conclusion which to use which location. There's no certain template that we can use. Today's scenario, the radicalization of extremism or the violent extremism. So each situation is changed, different from other, and the solution has to find separately, giving individual weightage to individual problems. The address, because we have to think our adversary, whoever it is also thinking the same way, using the hard power, soft power, and sometimes a combination of these, which later on coined by Joseph Nye, saying the smart power. So we are using the smart power also. So there's no way of addressing the hard power by hard power, soft power by soft power, or smart power by smart power. So it is, you have to change it as per the scenario, as per the requirements. Yesterday we learned, and even today, Professor Carl said the main reason, the main requirement is to listen. So if we listen carefully, we will be able to find the root of the extremism before it gets into the violent stage. If we can listen carefully, if we hear what is brewing, and we can nip it from the bud. And that's most of us fail to do. Fail of us understand what to do at the beginning. Then we came to the make and break of narratives. Again, Joseph Nye said, it's not the matter that which army wins, it's whose story sells the best. So it is the narrative, the extremes bring their narrative, we bring another narrative, and we try to impose our narrative. We mean the governments. They try to impose their narrative, and we come to a place where nobody wins. So it's better, as our group found out, make an alternative narrative which sells the best. Certainly, we cannot make a narrative for the people who are asking, different set of rules or different way of things, the extremists. What we have to do, use our smart power, by way of our culture, our foreign policies, and the political values, to make a situation, to make a platform where themselves come up with the alternative condition or alternative narrative where both parties can come to an agreement. That would solve the problems very easily. Certainly, not always the adversary external person or external entity. It can be within your country. In case of ours, it is part of our population. But when the externals are putting fuel into that, it's make things worse. So you have to use your hard power, your economy, your foreign cooperation, foreign contacts, your diplomacy to the maximum to solve these problems. So I think above all, Group Captain Nicholson gave a very good presentation summing up what we all discussed here today, and it was good. I think you covered it all. Thank you.
Thank you. So that was Ms. Sashikala Premawardana from the Director General of Ocean Affairs from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Sri Lanka, and Rear Admiral Article from the Sri Lanka Navy. So I move to the two experts from Group B, Admiral Dr. Jananath Kolamage and Dr. Manishka Vanasinghe Pascal, the Head of Department of International Relations, University of Colombo, Sri Lanka.
Okay, thank you. I think first I must congratulate the Army Commander for taking this bold decision to have a workshop. And I believe we have now a summary of 2 days of proceedings in record in the form of presentations. And you could see the enthusiasm generated by this workshop. And I'm sure a lot of planning has gone into that. So let me, Mahesh, congratulate you and your team for taking a bold decision, breaking away from the norm of conducting a defense seminar and embarking upon a very important area of our conference. The Group B focused on the role of military in the global governance, and I'm very happy because they deliberated in detail about what is governance, and then what is the global governance. They discuss about security, economic, environment, and humanitarian aspect of the people, and then they broke it into two when they talk about global governance in institutions, laws, and policies. So they could easily sum up the whole process of global governance, and then they went on to justify as to why the military is ideally suited in some instances, not in all instances of global governance. I mean, global governance, there are states are still the primary institution of the world, and there are supra-state institutions, international institutions. But then, in many of the occasions, the group discussed there are certain areas on certain occasions that the military can play, and the military has to play an important role, because the military is trained, resourced, and fully equipped and structured to undertake any task given to them. And they did deliberate quite a long detail about the access, mobility, sustenance, reach, flexibility, and versatility, and the resilience of the military in the performance of global governance. So we were very happy about how they approached. And then they not only talk about these attributes, but they also spoke about challenges which are there for military to engage in global governance. And they focus quite a lot on the global health. The military, because we know the global health and the humanitarian disasters are quite transborder. It may not be limited to one particular border. So in the global governance, military is equipped to play a key role in maintaining global health, or to assist the Global Health Organization and the other health organization, and should there be a need to provide humanitarian assistance and disaster relief. And also, then they went on to the key theme of the topic, that is countering violent extremism. So there they spoke about the terrorism, extremism, and then countering narrative in detail, and what are the countermeasures that can be taken. And they also spoke about hard and soft power, which is related to the topic number 1 that the first group did discuss. And they explained that the military, when we say military, it is people in uniform, boots and caps carrying guns. But it is not only the hard power that the military is capable. The military is capable of using soft power much, much more than many of the people, many of us think. So they spoke very well about that. And actually, they spoke about the negative impact of using military in solving global issues. Of course, they did not have much time to explain it in detail, and they spoke about, or they deliberated about, the military intervention which is actually resulting, enhancing violent extremism in the world. And they discussed Iraq, they discussed Afghanistan, they discussed what is happening in Syria, and then they also discussed what is happening in Egypt, not in the same context, but as a good case study. So it was really great, because when we think of role of military in global governance, it is not only the positive, there can be negatives as well. And we do see that there are violent extremism emanated from this military intervention. And also they discuss about the proliferation of small arms, which is, there are violent extremists, then what? So what? Can they kill the other people without any weapons? Now, who manufacture these weapons? So they did deliberate on that. And they also deliberated on 2 other topics which they did not have time. One was the technology, the use of military technology as a byproduct for civilian use. Like it could be a satellite, it could be a GPS, it could be the UAV, it could be any other thing which the military invests on R&D. The military use it for some time and then give it to the civilian or to the world mass, and that can be used for global governance. And also they did deliberate on the post-conflict role as a very important reconstruction, rehabilitation, reintegration, and also in the reconciliation. So we are very happy about the group number 2. I believe they did justice to the time allocated to them. There were a lot of enthusiasm, and they did share their expertise among the groups, and it was a very pleasant few hours for Manisha and me. I think I will now invite Manisha to sum up.
Thank you very much. Thank you to the Commander of the Army for inviting me here, and getting the participants themselves to be active and to discuss is a fantastic opportunity for them. And we both saw how enthusiastic they were. And one of the issues that they were talking and really grappled with was, what is the role of military and how can the military be involved? What is their role in terms of, they knew about the traditional security role, as in peacekeepers, as in deployment for security reasons, for interventions. But they were looking also at the non-traditional role of the military in global governance, especially in terms of the humanitarian aspects, but also demining, post-conflict resettlement. Those things were, unfortunately, the group divided into 2 broad areas and then into sub-components like 2 or 3 people, and they each had their own input for the presentation. And unfortunately, the time limit was such that at the when we were presenting, the topic was discussed to such a length that we decided to omit certain things. But I have to highlight that this group, Group B, did go into deep lengths on food, disaster, preemptive to preventive, and use of military to deploy soft and hard power. They even discussed about law of the sea and piracy. So what happened at our venue was kind of a summation of the entire day and a half of all the discussions we've had, plus their own experiences. Because they brought cases. There's this, no, in our case, this is what is happening. And what about your case? So that was also quite thrilling to watch and quite informative. So thank you very much for this, and I'm very pleased with our group. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Kolomage and Dr. Pascal. So we move on to the experts of Group 3, who are Dr. Radhika Kumaraswamy and Major General Ruwan Kulatunga. If I am to introduce Dr. Radhika Kumaraswamy, it will take a day. But there's one thing, I have her CV, I have everybody's CVs. One thing which is not on the CV is that in 2015, Foreign Policy magazine identified top 100 global thinkers. Dr. Kumaraswamy was one. So I think as Sri Lankans, we should all be proud of that. And she was identified in the category of being a challenger. So I think that explains a lot. So Dr. Kumaraswamy, and then of course Ruwan Kulatunga, Major General, is a personal friend of ours from BCIS. They share the same thing. Dr. Kumaraswamy is a current BCIS board member. Ruwan Kulatunga was one of our greatest students. So over to you, both of you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I also want to thank the Army Commander and also welcome the Foreign Secretary for this very important session, and I must say I'm very happy that there is a focus on this issue from both a military and a civilian background. I have absolutely no military background. I'm a human rights activist, and that you've drawn all of us in to discuss this issue is really an important aspect. Our group was a very vibrant one, as you can see by the presentation. But there were certain things that I just wanted to highlight, because it was about communities being empowered to fight violent extremism. And I think this is a very important issue, because it's also a very complicated issue. Some of the things that were highlighted is, first, what is a community? A community is deeply divided by class, caste, gender, and therefore when you're going to go into a community, you have to first understand it. That's the first thing. Secondly, you must understand that there's a difference between communities that are in war and communities that are in peace but are being subject to radicalization. Again, the strategies you use will have to be different. Communities in war, for example, you must realize, I think this is sometimes not realized by many military people. I have been to various global spots in the world. The families and the community is ambivalent. A lot of their sons and their nephews have joined the insurgents, and they themselves are confused and ambivalent. So understanding that confusion and that ambivalence and having empathy for it is, I think, very important. The third thing I'd like to say is that the best way to deal with the community is through dialogue and trust building, not through the use of force. And also, at no point should they be involved in military operations, because you put them in danger and the social fabric of the community will fall apart. You can use them to do humanitarian work. I was describing a situation in Afghanistan where we used the elders of a community to allow for girls' schools to be built, mainly by being intermediaries between the Taliban and the authorities. You can use them in development work, especially livelihood work, etc. And women, don't forget women. We have found throughout the world that they are very good interlocutors between yourself and maybe the other party if you want to get things done. So the independence, impartiality and neutrality of humanitarian work must be protected. I know there's this fourth generation warfare theory. I hope this principle will be protected even in that, because I have found around the world sometimes it is not, and then it's a disaster. Finally, let me say that during peacetime, there is also an importance with regard to protecting against radical extremism. And for that, I heard you heard a really excellent speech this morning about the importance of education. Some of UNICEF has produced curriculum on how to teach diversity and respect for diversity, about peace education, and how to make young children solve problems and conflicts without violence. So there are a whole host of issues that you can do through the education system. Secondly, as many people, the great theorists have said, if you want to change people's opinion, the most important thing is media. And that, of course, we must continue to use. I must say, I watch Rupa Vahini sometimes and ITN, and I don't know, it's all about how to grow a mango or something like that. Nothing, it's not used at all to promote issues of diversity and tolerance. And I think that's very important. Let me just say that we have come across the whole issue of cyber space and cyber hate. That is very, very important. I myself have been a victim of cyber hate at some point in my life, and I know how terrible it can be. So I think to some extent it's very important that we begin to regulate hate speech on cyber, especially when it is linked to extremism. And I think that is something that the international community should work toward. Finally, you know, in the community, when we work with internally displaced, the youth are a group that are often neglected. We speak to the elders, we speak to the women. But interestingly, the things that are very successful in IDP camps and others are youth clubs. They love to come to these clubs and play sports. They love to come to these clubs and use the computers. So getting youth together in some framework or from the different communities to do work together is another way of moving forward with regard to this. So in any way, the issue is to be vigilant and to understand that radicalization takes place in every community. Nobody is immune. And we must realize it's not religious only. Remember, the Sri Lankan ethnic conflict was not a religious conflict. So there is the possibility of radicalization of all communities. And therefore, we should be vigilant and try and handle it before it comes out to all-out warfare. Thank you.
Secretary to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Commander of the Sri Lanka Army, Commander of the Zambian Army, all other senior officers from visiting countries, dignitaries, officers and gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen. The chair and the eminent panelist, in my comments regarding Group C presentation and the preparation for the presentation, at the very beginning we started identifying the definitions of various terminologies like terrorism, extremism, what is violent extremism, and the community, etc. And I should say that the group with a lot of expert knowledge from various countries. They came out with different ideas, different definitions. At the last, we managed to come to a conclusion. And we come to a consensus that all these definitions are global and we have to identify in one term. Then we went on to identify what is violent extremism, and whether it is religious, motivated, or economic, or social, or any other matter. So that was also discussed in length. And finally, we came up to our own topic, that is the importance of community and empowering the communities to counter violent extremism. Here we extensively discussed and try to understand and define what is community and where the community stands in a violent extremism. And we discussed about many situations and many examples across the world, starting from our eminent panelist and the advisor for the group, Dr. Radhika. She came out with her own experience in Afghanistan. And also we had officers from Pakistan, Middle East, and other countries. So we all discussed this as a brainstorming session, and later we found the solution into our group's presentation. Here I want to stress one point, that is, as we discussed early, the Singaporean presentation, the lady who came out with a very important factor, that is the national education policy of any country that is facing a conflict. And in the post-conflict situation, it is very, very important to have a national policy on education. The education policy of that country has to be all-inclusive, because we are in a community where different religious groups, different communities, different ethnic groups are living together. Therefore, the inclusiveness in the policy of education is very important. So in our presentation, we have highlighted that, and that was very well identified. Also, looking at the Sri Lankan context and the experience, what we had. Earlier, we didn't want to discuss any Sri Lankan issues at the presentation, but in my own experience, I want to tell different things. During the conflict in Sri Lanka, how we managed to communicate with the community. It is a total success, I should say. When it comes to the peninsula in Jaffna, we managed to have a lot of programs, as you said, in Afghanistan. We also had programs planned for the community. Their inclusiveness into the program, the national program, how we managed to look after the community, how we managed to communicate with the this population, and how we managed to supply what their needs. And we had a very comprehensive plan for that. I think that was a successful factor at the end in 2009 when we had the total victory. Having said that, finally, in the conclusion, I want to tell you, public diplomacy, one speaker was talking about that. Public diplomacy is also very, very important as a tool. So public diplomacy involves community. So the community is invariably the major tool in countering violent extremism. So our presenters, the group, very efficiently identified that also, and that was presented very well. So as a whole, I think the Group C has identified the question very well and presented very well. Thank you.
Thank you. Major General Ruwan Kurutunga, he is also the current Commandant of Defence Services Command and Staff College at Batlanda. So we moved into the group, last group, Group 4, Group D, and the two expert personalities, eminent personalities who were there were Air Vice Marshal Sudanshana Haragoda Patirana, who is also the current Director of Air Operations of the Sri Lanka Air Force. And then we had Colonel Roy W. Speaks, who is currently the Assistant Chief of Staff of G5 strategy plans and exercises at 8th Theatre Sustained Command in Honolulu, Hawaii. So over to you, gentlemen.
Thank you, Chair. Secretary to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Thank you. Secretary to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. It gives me immense pleasure to be able to be in this session under the theme of use of fourth generation warfare to counter violent extremism. At the onset, I would like to thank the Group D for their participation at the discussion and sharing their honest and frank view, their personal experiences and regional experiences which gave us the total insight of their areas and to finally come up with the presentation as a team. And our team find it most relevant that we continue our discussion on these lines considering the fact that threats to human security keep on evolving through methods of the new methods and philosophies which require us as defense or civilian or academia or all hands on deck to stay not one, not two, but many steps ahead in taking positive, decisive and lasting steps to prevent violent extremism. In taking a brief insight into the theme, we look into what the fourth generation warfare means, and during the presentation you saw there are many definitions to describe the fourth generation warfare. That itself tells us how uncertain and how fluid this situation is. And also going further in the discussion, we thought that first we must understand what this first, second, third and fourth generation of warfare means, and in the very layman or the very simplest way is that the first generation warfare, we understood that it's man versus man, and the second generation is the use of projectile in the battle, and the third generation warfare is the maneuver warfare, which in the larger context where you have large armies maneuvering to battle each other for the victory. And in the fourth generation, which is the great concern to us, essentially demarcates the period where the lines between the nation state and war policies are increasingly blurred. Thus, rather than countries fighting against countries, we have come into an era where countries are fighting against communities, multinational coalitions are fighting against organizations, etc. With the ever-growing potentials through groundbreaking technology, the numerical or firepower superiority of one party is no longer a decisive factor in this context of warfare. In having a further insight into the fourth generation warfare, then we look into the tenets of fourth generation warfare, namely the political side of it, where you have the local, regional or global inputs or the decision makers' influence into the fourth generation warfare in countering the violent extremism. Then we discuss the tenet of the economic aspect of this warfare, which is very important because now we can see in this current time or the current situation where some non-state actors are more stronger economically than legitimate states. So where we are in some sort of a dilemma where who has the economic power in this current global the balance. And militarily is a very straightforward hard power, where we can use hard power and how we can use hard power. And then we discuss about the social aspect of the fourth generation warfare, where our societies, how to harness or canvas or influence the harmony and coexistence and the culture of the society to winning this battle against the violent extremism. But we did not stop there. We went one step further, and then we asked the question, should we not go into the fifth generation warfare? Why should we stay and try to battle this at the fourth generation warfare. Because as we see, the violent extremism is already has start using the fifth generation warfare aspects into their advantage. So as the media and the, the military personnel or the expert in this field, it is time for us to think strongly using the fifth generation warfare tools in winning this battle. The mainly, why not we use the technology and the religion into bringing and make it the fifth generation warfare against the violent extremism. Though we like it or not, the religion plays a major role in the future battles. And some of our participants are asking questions, why not? The religious leaders aren't sitting here with us today to discuss these matters, because the future decisions, the religious leaders will have a strong area to play. Our next point of concern in today's discussion is the extremism. The Oxford Dictionary defines it as the holding of extreme political or religious views, fanaticism. Expanding this, we saw that the extremism may also lie based on race, language, region, and many other factors. In the current context of the global society, we saw that the gradual erosion of basic social values have slowly given rise to the extremist ideologies, making this menace ever more prevalent than before. It has come to a point where it is openly advocated and used as a base to instill fear, threatening the very basics of human security rather than attacking an established institution such as a country or a military arm. The potential of uncontrollability in the main cause of concern when dealing with extremism. The ISIS has already given us the best example on extremism in recent times, and their method of spreading fear across the world has motivated totally independent individuals to follow their morals. This was evident through the sporadic attacks across Europe, as well as the incident that happened in Dhaka, Bangladesh. Then we look at how we can use fourth generation warfare to counter violent extremism. Victory against extremism may arrive not only through numerical overwhelming, but through shattering their fundamental moral values. In that, we discuss the steps given in the action plan of the UN, where by addressing the drivers of violent extremism and setting a policy framework and taking actions on priority areas such as dialogue and conflict prevention, strengthening good governance, engaging communities, empowering youth, gender equality, education, strategic communication and internet and social media, etc. Ladies and gentlemen, time has come for us in the professional arms and of course with the civil societies to think beyond the traditional borders of warfare. The time has come to make the battle into the mind of the enemy and fight it there. The initial knockout may be achieved through fundamental military methods, but the lasting solution will need a comprehensive, wholesome approach through methods such as reconciliation, confidence building, empowering youth, equality and equal opportunities, nation building, education, skill development and employment, etc. The list is not conclusive, and there may be many other methods. So the time is right for us to start thinking along the lines of not only fourth generation warfare, but with fifth generation warfare to counter violent extremism. Thank you.
So I'll take just a few minutes. Sir, first of all, I want to thank you on behalf of the U.S. Army for inviting me here, and more so to take part in this panel and to be a part of the process. This is a complex problem. It's defined by a lack of boundaries and unconventional methods. It's a broad subject. We didn't have a lot of time to cover it. But I will tell you the group participation was incredible, and the knowledge on the subject was impressive. The group came in and they had done their homework and they knew what they were talking about. And I think this definitely shows the dedication and the seriousness of this body and this forum as a whole, and I hope to see it continue for many years. Generally, the group agreed on the tenets of fourth generation warfare, and then we talked about the potential additions, as the Vice Air Marshal alluded to. And the discussion on how really started out tended to move towards regional conflicts and examples. We spoke a little about Boko Haram. We spoke a little about ISIL and their actions in Marawi in the Philippines, but the group was very quickly able to grasp the emphasis that we need to address this from a global perspective. Regional perspectives won't work to combat violent extremist actions. It just won't. We talked about several different examples, and we came to that agreement, and that's how the presentation moved into the global aspect. One piece that was noticeably absent from our group was the academics, and we discussed the body in here about we have the military, we have the academics, and we have the government officials. And as the Vice Air Marshal alluded to, and what I think is critical that we're missing if we want to get at the root level of this is the religious aspect. It's something that we need to face again as a global community, and we need to face it head on, and we need to work to establish some baselines by which we can move forward as a global community. And again, this is a great start. The final point that I'll make is the group definitely agreed on continuing this global dialogue, and it can't be said enough. The all hands on deck comment that Admiral Fallon made yesterday was very fortuitous, and I think you can see that by the amount of times that that comment was repeated today. So with that, sir, again, thank you. That's all I have.
Thank you, Vice Marshal Pathirana and Colonel Speaks. I think that ends the comments made by our eminent experts based on their observing their group presentations. So it's up for me to quickly do a wrap up of the conversation and hand it back to the organizers. So what I thought was I'll do is the best thing I could do quick is take the 4 themes, which was hard and soft power, global governance, community empowerment, and fourth generation warfare as a means of tackling CVE. So going to the first theme about hard and soft power, I think one of the major challenges when you kind of get into this matrix of hard, soft, and smart power is we get seduced by the concept itself and sometimes get kind of contained within the concept, which is challenging because if you look at what's been happening in the past few years, it seems like states are becoming harder, right? The adversaries are becoming softer, smarter, and right? So the states and the manifesting violence leads for states to become harder and harder, while the way of the extremists seems to be a nice, charming, seductive way of getting the recruitment. So I think we might need to come to a kind of a point where we need to revisit the whole idea of hard and soft power in the 21st century. It may have worked and may have sounded right at the fall of the Soviet Union, and when Professor Nai was trying to kind of introduce a way forward for the US, but a way forward for the US does not mean a way forward for the world. So when you look at an intellectual concept, it has to be kind of revisited. I think we had this intense conversation in the previous defense conference, which was on soft power, but I think that's a challenge in itself. To address. Secondly, on global governance, of course there are definitions, but in simply coming as an academic, what does global governance means? It means how the world hangs together. How does the world do what it does best, as it is now? But the problem then is, we have been kind of honing in on actors like ISIL, but we have been forgetting actors like far-right, ultra-nationalist groups. If you look at the biggest challenge to global governance now is ultra-right nationalism, which is kind of trying to break down the status quo of global governance, which is creating itself, it is manifesting very violently. The xenophobia, the anti-immigration, the voice, these are also challenging global governance. And at a point, they will become more violent. So how does a educating, learning military address these things? It can be Sri Lanka, it can be the US, it can be Australia. So that challenge is always there. We are living in that time when the whole idea of hanging together is dissolving. So that's a big challenge for any military. Thirdly, the idea of community empowerment itself, again, there needs to be a lot of soul searching. What is a community? Right? Community has been very interest among anthropologists, sociologists for half a century now. People have been looking at the idea of community studies and how the community contributes to empowering people to be with people, to be on the side of the people. Right? So at the moment what we are witnessing is a destruction of communities. Destruction of communities by extremism as well as counter-extremism, as what Dr. Kumaraswamy said. So when we are trying to kind of counter CVE or violent extremism, in itself may create more extremism. Like the best example is the kind of blowback from drone warfare. So, which itself is an attack on communities, but itself, I mean, it is an attack on terrorism, it is an attack on adversaries, but the whole concept is kind of, of course there is a debate around it, I don't want to create controversies. I took that as an example of how sometimes CVE, it may be well intended, but may challenge the whole heart and soul of the idea of community. And coming finally to the idea of fourth generation warfare, again, and as very correctly said by the expert, by Vice Marshal, that the idea itself may be becoming obsolete, right? Because let me just look at what I just wrote down. The whole idea of the category of looking at adversaries from state and non-state. This dichotomy is kind of challenging us because we are trying to put, sometimes the adversary may be half state, half non-state. The hybridity, we are not capturing that. So it's very hard. It's a challenge for militaries. It's hard for academics. I think when you put it into operational, tactical context, it's harder. How do you kind of, how do you understand somebody running down a protester in Charlottesville versus somebody understanding an insurgent in Marawi? That is a spectrum of extremism. So how do you kind of counter that? Do you do more surveillance? Do you do more robots, more drones? Or do you use a different approach, such as kind of sensitive education? I wrap this up. I'm an educationist, so I always believe the only hope lies in education. I think in that context, this conference is very pertinent. The Sri Lanka Army has taken done the right thing. This conference is not a kind of a military conference. We are not talking about, military technical aspects. We are talking about an intellectual academic exercise. We are making our soldiers, officers think not just as foot soldiers or as weapons of war. We are taking about them like more in a larger, broader context of what really makes security tick. National education policy is security. So if we can create an education system and run it through everybody, a system that makes you fight secure values, norms, institutions that has worked for us. These institutions, ideas, religious values that has worked for us, that's probably where we might be able to find a solution for CVE, for violent extremism. So I think with the time restrictions, that's it. We'll stop it here. And once again, I thank all the experts who did a fabulous service, and I should congratulate all the participants. It was not easy for suddenly people of 16 nations to get together in 1.5 hours and come with the presentations. So given those limitations, they did a good job. So thank you all, and congratulations all. And congratulations Sri Lanka Army. Thank you.